Good evening, everyone. Welcome to all of you. Tonight, as we usually do on every second Monday of each month, we have our meeting in English. All the other days are in Portuguese. But since today is the second Monday of April, last week was April 1st, which I hope everybody that came didn't think that everything that was said here was a lie. But today is the 8th, so we don't have that problem, we don't have that issue. So for us to start our meeting, we would like to invite everyone to say a prayer with us, so that we can focus even more with the good spirits that are together with us, so that we can proceed to our regular meeting saying, "Dear Master, brother and friend Jesus, once again here we are at our little spot of light, our Cantinho de Luz, so that we can together with you, with the good spirits, and under the blessings of our dear Father, our dear Creator, think about love. Love in terms of how we understand, we feel the world around us. But most importantly, we would like to thank you for all the forces, for all the energy, for everything that we've been receiving, so that we can keep going with our lives, trying to put into practice what you taught us and what you keep trying to make us see and understand. May these blessings that we all feel here touch our minds, our hearts, and our souls. And may your love be with us now and always. So be it. So, as we usually do, we have the reading and a brief comment of a message, of an inspirational message. Usually we take those messages from the book Our Daily Bread, and tonight we're going to have our dear friend Nancy to talk to us about chapter 109, right, Nancy? So she will be here and she will say what the chapter title is and explain it to us. Thank you, Nancy.
Good evening, everyone. Like Mackenzie said, the book is Our Daily Bread, chapter 109, and the title is The Three Imperatives. So I say to you, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. Who said that was Jesus? It is on Luke chapter 11, verse 9. Ask, seek, and knock. These three imperatives of the recommendations of Jesus were not pronounced without a special significance. In the entangled struggles and depths in the terrestrial experience, it is crucial that the individual learns to ask for the path of liberation from old conventional suffocating chains, sterile preconceptions, and empty old habits. It is necessary to forcefully and decisively desire to come out of that dark brush in which the majority of individuals lose sight of the eternal interests. Immediately thereafter, it is imperative to seek. The procurement consists of selective efforts. The field is replete with inferior attractions, some of which are full of brilliant suggestions, It is indispensable to locate the dignified, sanctifying action. Many seek dangerous mirage, somewhat like that of the butterfly that becomes fascinated with the brightness of a fire. They approach from far and get close to the flames, which consumes the blessing of their body. It is imperative to learn to seek out legitimate goodness. Once the sanctifying path is established, the moment has arrived to knock on the door of edification, but without hammering, methodically, and without the chisel of goodwill, it is extremely difficult to transform the resource of the corporeal life into luminous works of divine art. When looking ahead to spiritual happiness and eternal love, it will matter little to pray without direction, to procure without examination, and to act without an elevated objective. Let us plead with the Father for our liberation from primitive animalism. Let us seek the sublime spirituality and work to localize ourselves within it, in order to become converted into faithful instruments of the divine will. Ask, seek, and knock. This trilogy of Jesus enfolds a special significance for the students of the gospel in all epochs. All right, so I took some notes here, and this message that it is on Luke, Jesus starts saying, ask, seek, and knock. 3 steps. The first step is to ask, because Jesus said, ask and it will be given to you. We have to pay attention what we have to do. Pay attention in our needs. So it starts when I ask, and I have to know exactly what I'm asking for, what I really need. If this is the right thing for me and at the same time for the others. And remember that I am responsible for what I'm asking. Because I will ask, I will get it. Jesus said, ask and it will be given to you. And I have to understand that it is my job to define my goals. Of course, I always can ask the guardian angel, everybody has one, to advise me, and he or she will help me, will advise me. By the way, there is a team of good spirits waiting to support me. The only catch is that they cannot help me unless I ask them first. I always have to ask, because I have my free will and they will respect it. So then it comes to the second part. Many doors will open in front of me or on my way. This is the moment I have to seek, I have to search, I have to see which one I will take it. Keep in mind, you want to be a better person. So do your best to take the right one for you. I remember a passage on John chapter 9, John chapter 10, verse 9, where Jesus said, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. If you find, or if you choose a door, large door, and it's a lot of fun, you can do whatever you want, you don't have to worry about others, I'm afraid you took the wrong one. Jesus' door is narrow, but it gives you a chance to overcome your fears, challenging yourself to be a better one. And on the last, or before the last paragraph, it says, without hammering methodically and without the chisel of goodwill. Chisel is it's a new word for me. It is, I forgot in Portuguese, it's kind of a tool that you use like a sand, right? Exactly. Mm-hmm. That's why he used this word and say, and without the chisel of goodwill. So it means we have to make effort every single day. No breaks. We have to have discipline. Don't lose your faith. Don't give up and go straight ahead. That's what I understood about this message, and I hope you guys like it. Thank you very much.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Hi. It's again a pleasure to be here this evening, and found the book. And tonight, we're going to continue to study the Gospels according to Spiritism. We're going to finish one of the longest chapters of the book, which has been about afflictions, about suffering. It's called Blessed Are the Afflicted. And interestingly enough, the title of the message that we are studying tonight is Voluntary Trials. And that was all it said on the, it's all that said on the schedule. And it was weird because I thought, okay, didn't I just talk about that a couple months ago, maybe? And it was, so this is 25, so 2 months ago, we talked about voluntary torments. So I was confused a little bit about what exactly did we make a mistake in the schedule or something? But nope, we did not make a mistake. That was a message by Fenelon, message 23. And tonight's message is by a spirit that's simply signed as a guardian angel. And and it's a very interesting letter from this spirit. Actually, no, there's a whole lot of other questions here too. But I basically I read this this message from this guardian angel, and it made me think a lot about what it is that we are doing
here, towards with this opportunity to live in this world, the opportunity that God has given us, right? And so the spirit, this guardian angel, is likely being asked by Kardec and by the people in the mediumship meetings about suffering, and as Jesus said, "Blessed are the afflicted." So should one suffer? Then should one look for suffering? And so the message, this whole section is called the true hair shirt. A hair shirt is a piece of garment. They used hair, but you can use metal pieces or anything really. It's meant to be uncomfortable. It's meant to be painful to the person that uses it. It's been used by ascetics, people who don't really who believe that they have to suffer in this life, and only through suffering they can see themselves in the skin of those who suffer as well. And so they believe that by making themselves suffer, that they will find that enlightenment that they seek. And Kardec was a very inquisitive man, as we know, coming from having the Spirit's book being all about questions. I'm sure he and his fellow spiritists at the time were always asking many questions of the spirits. And in this message, the Spirit starts by saying, "You ask me, is it licit for a man to lessen his own probation?" So in this case, can you try to suffer less? And he said, well, would you say that it's valid for somebody to, remove a piece of for somebody who's drowning to save himself, for example, or remove a piece of thorn from their hand because it's hurting? And the answer, you could almost laugh at that question, right? Of course, if I'm about to die drowning, I will try to save myself. If somebody is about to die drowning, I might actually try to help them. And so it's part of our nature to relieve our own suffering, to look for more comfortable position and healthier position. So if I don't remove the thorn in my hand, that might actually turn into sepsis at some point if nothing is done about it. So I want to clean that wound and stop it from hurting, of course. But so the answer is pretty obvious. But then he points out the reason behind our trials is to help us use our intelligence, patience, and resignation. And so I marked this because I wanted to talk about these aspects: the patience, intelligence, and resignation, as we talk, about some general ideas about the suffering, the trials that one may put themselves in, to in order to be better, to achieve enlightenment, and so on. So this is a really nice message, by the way. So I suggest anybody who wants to read it later. It's quite inspiring. But I wanted to read a couple of parts of it. He says, "The merit of any suffering is in suffering the consequences that cannot be avoided without complaining." And I marked the "without complaining" because that is the key. We're not here in this world to come and complain. So we were just talking about how we tend to complain a lot, right? Well, we're not. Most of us are not in Brazil anymore. So we're up here. We came to Boston, or the northeast of the United States, and it's cold. And then it warms up, and then it gets cold again, and you're like, and it's cold again? and we keep complaining. But if we're to follow our guardian angel here, if the merit is in suffering the consequences, so stop complaining, right? Persevering with the fight and not allowing oneself to become desperate when one's not successful. See? So I like to use simple examples because sometimes we read these messages or we think about these really deep messages that the spirits have left us in the Gospel according to Spiritism or the Spirits book, and we sometimes it's just hard for us to see ourselves in these messages, on a day to day. But who doesn't like to complain, right? About the weather, especially in Massachusetts, right? As we just came out of a long winter, we had 3 days of spring, and we're back into the winter again, right? So we'll get there, and then when summer comes here, there will be that 1 week in July that everybody's like, "Oh, this is gonna kill everyone, so hot," and we're gonna keep complaining, right? So perhaps we want to learn. We want to take a little bit of this message into our lives and saying, okay, whenever I watch myself complaining or whenever I see myself complaining, is that, what exactly can I do to do better? So, so the Spirit then says, okay, well, this then naturally leads to the next question, which is, if Jesus said, "Blessed are the afflicted," and I want to be blessed, then should I seek affliction? It says, "Blessed are the afflicted." Should I be afflicted so that I can be blessed? And one of the things that we see throughout the Gospel according to Spiritism is, and the Spirit's book is always that that message that God has given you what you can handle. So take it and handle it. And He's not giving you any more than you can handle. There's a lot of trials and tribulations that you will be facing. And so seeking afflictions for the sake of having afflictions may not be the most productive way to achieve this blessing that Jesus had said for us, right? So, but He does say, of course, even just simple logic of the language says, if you say, "Blessed are the afflicted," and you are afflicted, you will be blessed. However, as again we see all throughout the Spirit's book, it all will come in the utility of that suffering, in the utility of this affliction. And so He says here, be content with the trials and problems that God sends, and don't try to get too much, because it may be a little heavy for you to bear. And also, don't try to weaken yourself, your body in particular, because these trials and tribulations will require your body to be strong. So you will need all your strength to fulfill your work here on earth. So they say, well, if you're needlessly attempting to weaken your own self, your own body, then really that is a bit of a killing yourself, bit of a real suicide, if you will. And as we understand of the many things that God has given us, our body is in this earth the most precious gift that we have received, and so do not abuse the gift that you have received from God. Do not martyr the body voluntarily with something like a hair shirt, right? It sounds weird, right? A hair shirt, but that's actually one of the ways that people used to do it. They used to put very coarse hair on the shirt, and then imagine wearing that day in and day out. It can be quite uncomfortable, especially the ones made of metal that prick your body all day long. So so suffering, good. Suffering, afflictions, good. You'll be blessed. However, how do you make that happen? How can you make it so that it's actually truly meaningful? And the answer is always, in the utility of that. So he says, quite the contrary occurs when man imposes suffering upon himself in order to alleviate the suffering of others. If you support cold and hunger with the object of offering heat and sustenance to another, thereby causing your body to be affected, you're making a sacrifice, which the sort of sacrifice which God will bless. So, when you have chosen to take on a task that is more painful to you than you need to do, but it's in the utility of others, then that's when you are then finally coming to understand this message that Jesus left us so long ago. Blessed are the afflicted. Right? And I'll go back, actually, I meant to go back and read just to remind ourselves, how it's written in the Bible. It says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. All right? Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. And so, all of these kinds of afflictions, these are all listed in the Beatitudes in Matthew 5 and Luke 6. One of the most important messages in history, and one of the most important messages in the Bible. As a matter of fact, a man named Mahatma Gandhi is said to have said, if you lose the entire Bible, except for this part of Jesus's life, the Sermon on the Mount, that you would have would not miss the crucial bit of moral understanding of the Bible. And this man, Mahatma Gandhi, is one of the examples of lives that I wanted to bring up as a story today, because as I said in the beginning, this guardian angel mentions the reason behind our trials is to help us to use our intelligence, patience, and resignation. And who better to represent this sentiment or this idea than Mahatma Gandhi? He was the son of a politician in India before, as the Hindus were being controlled by the British Empire, right? India was part of the British Empire at the time. He grows up, gets married at 13 to a girl that was 14. At the time, very much like India was in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Eventually goes off. His father was a politician of sorts, and so he was a very influential man and had enough money to support his family. And so Gandhi had come from a relatively well-to-do family. Goes to London, goes to law school, and becomes a lawyer with a degree in London. Goes back to India and starts to try to practice law in India. Doesn't do very well. Decides that he's going to South Africa, and that's where his story begins. Right? Goes to South Africa, starts. He's Indian, not a local, an African, and during that time, the native Africans, the black people, were not allowed where the whites were, right? Very much like in the United States in this, up to the 60s. It's very much a racist society, allowed to discriminate based on race, and he was of olive complexion, like most Indians are, and as he's interacting with others in South Africa, and he gets into a train or something, and he's prohibited from sitting where the Englishmen were, or the British were allowed to sit. He was being asked to sit back behind where the Africans were meant to go. So he was being treated as a second-class citizen, and he originally started fighting for the right for himself to take the regular places that an Englishman or a British person could take, under the explanation that he was fully part of the British Empire, and he was not local, he was not African, so therefore he wasn't supposed to be discriminated, so he had rights and so on. And that fight wasn't going anywhere. And at some point he realizes that he actually has to fight not for himself or for his Indian fellows, but and not just there, but for the natives too. And he essentially starts a nonviolent movement, to fight for the rights of those considered second-class citizens. Eventually goes back to India and becomes the key person in India's fight for their independence. Right, he goes back, becomes a politician, and through a policy of nonviolence, eventually in 1942 or 3, I don't remember, gets through multiple fasting protests that he did, makes this amazing change, achieves an independence through nonviolence, the independence of India from the UK, and doesn't get to live too long after that because he's killed by a different person. But his message of nonviolence, his approach, his intelligent approach to the problems that he faced throughout his life, and his devotion to fight for justice and equality at his own sacrifice, at his own peril, is an example that nobody, that history will never forget, and it, because he's somebody who who applied intelligence, patience, and resignation to the causes that he was fighting for, and he's an example to everyone, to all of us, about how to deal with injustice. And he achieved all this with nonviolence, and he did go through fasting. And one can only imagine how much suffering that is to oneself. And then there's that story that people assign to him, although he might have used it, but it's also assigned to to just an old Arab story of the man who tells the who's so the mom brings the kid to the wise man and asks him to tell the kid to stop eating sugar because that's not good, stop eating sugar. And he says, well, yeah, come back in a week or two. And doesn't say anything to the kid. Mom comes back with the kid 2 weeks later. He says, okay, kid, you should stop eating sugar. It's not good for you. And the mom asks him, so why didn't you tell him that 2 weeks ago? And he goes, well, up to 2 weeks ago, I used to eat sugar. I couldn't tell him to go through the pain of not having the sugar that he likes if I wasn't going through it. So this idea of going through the pain to help others, whether it's a simple pain of, well, I'm showing by my example, leading by my example, skipping sugar, to get this kid to do better, or whether he did it for a whole country, for the independence of his own country and for all of his compatriots, his example will live on. And then, as I said before, sometimes the problem with these messages, sometimes the issue that we have in talking about these or listening to these stories or this sort of message in a church or in a spiritist center like here is how out of touch certain things feel. You think about, well, this guy was fighting for his independence. It was a moment. It was a moment that needed, that just had to happen, and he was the embodiment of what all the people had to go through. But that's why we know him. Or there isn't a compelling reason for me to do what he did. So how am I going to ever match someone like Gandhi? Right. And and how could I turn that into something that I can think of personally today? How could I do something today that would still make a big difference? So I looked for examples of a couple of different people, and there's this article on The Guardian that I read that talks about do-gooders, people who have decided they have to do good for life to even make sense. It was a very, very interesting article, and there are two examples of two different people that I have found that are very good examples of how today we can, and people just like you and me can start thinking of how am I going to turn this lesson of doing something more and going through some pain myself, and how may other people have gone through that and not even thought that way. And those are some examples that I was looking for. And there's this guy Paul Farmer and this woman called I think Julia Wise. Anyway, so when I looked for sacrifice, you read stories. You can read stories about people who, basically, paid the ultimate sacrifice. They gave up their own lives for the good of others. And one of the good examples is there were three guys who in Chernobyl in 1986. They realized the plant is burning down. There's a nuclear explosion just happened, and people realize, there's this other core that's melting, and if it melts through the floor and it finds and it falls under this pool of water that was used to cool down the cores, but if it falls under in that pool, that the reaction will cause the entire thing to explode, and more than likely, millions of people would be dead within maybe a few weeks or months because of radiation poisoning. And so and then you get the example of these three guys who basically raise their hand and say, and they realized, oh, what we need to do here is we need to go empty that pool. But the pool was already in the area that was very radioactive. People had already died within, hours of exposure. But they said, if nobody goes there to empty this pool, this will turn into millions of people dying. And so these three guys go in and they end up drying the pool. And the explosion that they were expecting to happen never happened because that water was gone. And we know how bad the situation in Chernobyl was back in '86, and it could have been a lot worse if it wasn't for these three men who nobody even knows their name. They just know the story because back then, the Soviet media and the Soviet government tried to shut down the story as much as possible. But you take a situation like this, and these are three people that, in the worst case scenario of their lives, they decided, I will give my life to, if necessary, to save millions. But then again, none of us here works at a nuclear plant, I don't think. So, when are we going to be put in a position like that? And, you always see YouTubes or Facebook posts of people say, well, so-and-so, jumped in the water to save somebody, and they eventually save that person. Or sometimes people die trying to save somebody else, and they save, stories of people who donate a part of their liver to someone, and that other person lives, and they eventually die of their own complications. So all sorts of situations like that where people are willing to put themselves on the line and their lives on the line to help others. But again, whenever I read these stories, whenever I'm thinking about these, at least, I feel like it's hard to really imagine myself in this situation. And if I were to ever be in that situation, do I even know what I would do? Would I be one of the hundreds of people who ran away from Chernobyl as fast as possible? One of the three who said, this is it for me, but a million people are not about to die because of it. So, but those are very, very, very important stories and important situations where people have indeed sacrificed their lives, but not very common, not very feasible or plausible. But Paul Farmer and Julia Wise were two stories that I thought were quite interesting. Paul Farmer is a man who was one of the founders of a organization called Partners in Health. He grew up in Florida, in rural Florida, so a poor area of this country. A smart guy. Eventually does very well in school, goes to Duke University. And he even says, well, when I applied to Duke, I applied because that's what I thought I wanted to go. And then I figured, I wasn't going to apply to the state colleges until I knew I had some extra time. He says, I was happy that I got accepted, went to Duke, but even in his second year at Duke, he wanted to do medicine. And he started thinking about, what it is that he wanted to do. And he I think during a summer, went down to Haiti, and saw the situation in the basic situation of health care in Haiti, and decides that he's going to do something about his life, about helping in places like Haiti. And 23, 24, 25, that's how old he was at the time. Continues his studies, completes, goes to Harvard Medical School, eventually becomes a doctor at Brigham Women's Hospital in Boston. This guy's usually here. The beginning of the story that I had read, it said that he decided that he would live on 2 months worth of pay at Brigham and Women's, and then he would dedicate the rest of his year in a place like Haiti. Long story short, however, this man realized that if he was just going to be there to help people who were sick right at the time, that there could be some satisfaction to himself in that. But he also realized while he was at Harvard, while he was at Duke, but mostly, especially at Harvard, he realized that any type of research that he would come up with or anybody would come up with, they would just get the money to do the research. It's Boston. There are thousands of doctors doing research in this town. Everybody gets the money to advance medicine and so on. And he realized, well, this is really good. Why is it that we put so much money in medicine here? But, when we decide to put money in medicine somewhere like Haiti or West Africa and so on, other places where his current, this group Partners in Health operates, he realized he uses this term called socialization for scarcity, where, people decide that, well, even if you put that much money in these areas, you can't really fix everything. So just go for the basics. Go, cure just the cholera or the malaria and so on. And he realized that in order to really achieve equity in healthcare throughout the world, that a lot had to be done. Now, this guy at 25, at 30, he's a brilliant doctor. I know a lot of doctors in this area. Like, they can do really well. They can do financially really well. And this guy decided, that wasn't going to make him happy. And through the work of that he was doing in Haiti and, working with other people, realized, that there's better, smarter ways to achieve equity. Again, intelligence, patience, resignation. The guy goes, decided that, well, I could just give up and go there, but then that wouldn't be the most effective use of my time because I'm a Harvard doctor. I go to Boston, I ask for any money in research, I get it. So I got to figure out a way to do that, but then make it more equitable. Simple, intelligent plans to attack a big problem. And he says, and there's still a lot of people, and he says some of my good friends at Brigham's or other Harvard hospitals, and he's always having to have this conversation. You have to think about the people there, the thousands of lives there as the thousands of lives here. It's not, well, with the money you can save 10 lives here, you can save 1,000. You can do good for 1,000 there. It can't be that way. It's got to be better distributed. So, and he continues to work on this. It's a really good story. I read a nice interview with him on the Harvard Review, and an inspiring example of and then the interviewer asks him, well, is there some sort of medical work that needs to be done more than others to help these people in Haiti? And he says, we need to teach them locally, all the basic stuff. He says, it's if we do everything that we do here, all the teaching hospitals in Boston and throughout the country, right? They'll eventually take it over, right? But we got to think of them not as less than us, just, apply the same level of care. And, we will need secretaries. We need, not everybody has to be a epidemiologist. He was the only one in Haiti for the longest time. He talks about the earthquake, how really bad that situation was, and he said, but one thing I realized is that I can't do everything, and so I wasn't going to try to just go and fix everything that I could with as little as I could. Decides that we've got to come back here and get that money that goes into research here. Why is the life of somebody in Boston worth more than the life of somebody in Haiti? So, somebody who's willing to challenge that sort of concept. And Julia Wise, this other story that I said that I read in The Guardian, really, really interesting. And I think the general idea is, they picked this one woman. Um, it's um, it's a movement. I guess they're trying to show that the story represents more of a movement of people thinking more about what it really means to be altruistic and helpful out there. And it goes through through the story of this girl who, as a kid, she used to go to church a lot. Her parents would used to bring her to church, and she would take her allowance, drop the entire thing on the church bucket, because she always thought, I have enough. Somebody else needs it more than me. Ever since she was a kid. Eventually, as she's turning into being a teenager, she decides that church isn't right for her anymore. But she realizes, well, I got all this money. It's still not good for me. I got to find somebody else to give this to. And it goes through sort of this entire life. She's not that old yet, but her life at going through this struggle with the idea that any money that she kept for herself or that she used for herself was less helpful to her than it was to other people. And so, it goes on like methodically describing the sorts of things that she decided to do with her time and her money. And, the decision, for example, to not just go, at some point she realizes, well, I could go on a mission and help people in Africa or help people, in Haiti or wherever. And she realized, well, I can be there and it might feel really good to me to be helping people. We hear from people that go in missions, how happy they feel that they're helping people in person. But she said, I couldn't feel happy about that, because if I was back home and I was earning dollars, earning a lot of money here, I could just keep a little bit of that to myself to have food, place to live, and I could send the rest. And that would still help a lot more people than if I was there helping them and not making any money. And it goes through her whole life. As she's going through college, she realizes, I don't think I'm ever going to get married, because how can I find somebody who would even, consider doing this as well? Meets a guy named Jeff, and and at first, I think, yeah, it says they say that she goes out with him to some state fair or something, and she feels like she really wants a candy apple, right? And she says, I'm not going to buy that. That could help a lot of people. That if that's unnecessary money spending, and then the boyfriend at the time, she eventually gets to marry him. He says, well, I'll buy it with my own money. And then she said, well, but if you're going to buy it, then just give me the money and then I'll send it to the people. And as I'm reading this story, I'm like, I'm following her logic and the just the thinking of how they're trying to come up with a way to keep track of what it is that they're making, what it is that they're spending, and how are they sending this to, in their case, a charity that they were looking for, a charity that could do the most good with the least amount of money, so they can send the most amount of money to do the most good. And just as I'm reading this, I'm realizing how painful just the going through the motions and thinking about this must be. Not the pain that, okay, well, I think they lived in Boston for a while also. I'm not sure if they're still here. But this pain, the pain that they're going and deciding, okay, we're going to give this much, 50% of this. Well, you give all, and the guy decides to marry her, and well, he says, well, he's a computer programmer, so he realizes, well, I'm going to make more than you. So how about you donate everything you got? I'll give half of mine. And at some point they realize, well, can't really live this way, because then they couldn't afford it. And so they recalculate this. But just going through the motions of thinking about this whole thing, and how that can make you feel so much anguish, that no matter how much you try to make, so she goes through the example. She says, well, when I was in college, I realized, well, if what I really want to do is make the most impact, I could become a doctor or a lawyer. I could become a lawyer or go into finance and make a lot more money, and then therefore donate a lot more money. But then she said, well, but I can't really do that very well, and I'd probably be miserable. So no matter how much money I'd be sending, I would still, never achieve what I want. And so, it's a very, very good story. But, it's, to me, it became this example. And I suggest you guys can go, it's on the Guardian website. This whole story of her life and so on. It comes time to, she says something about, there was at some point after she wasn't going to church anymore, her mom one day comes home and says, you're still looking for, if you're still looking for something, some good cause to give your money to, there's this kid at church, son of one of the people, I think, in the store at church, that got sick and needed some money to help with paying bills and so on. And so here's a great cause for you to give your money to. And then she starts thinking, she says, well, but it's going to be a lot more expensive for us to help him here, because here is so expensive. And if I take that same amount of money and I give it to Oxfam or whatever the charity was that she mentioned, I can help like 100 lives. So why is the life of somebody that I happen to know more valuable than the lives of, dozens of people that I don't know? So imagine living with that sort of hair shirt, like really making, and that's the part that I think, stayed with me with this story is, it has to make you think a lot about your priorities in life, what it is that you want to do. She says, when she started thinking about people who become poor to go help the poor, right? Go to Haiti or wherever to help the poor. And, she's saying, well, was there really any difference in choosing not to earn more money and spending their money on a new sofa or fancy clothes? The difference between, not making the money and then spending that money on your own fancy clothes or whatever, or deciding to not make any money so I could go help somebody else who is in a tougher situation. It makes you feel really good. And now you're poor and feeling good, but you could be doing more help if you just had stayed. So, she's going through all of this thinking, and I'm like, that must be painful, right? It is painful to think about this. And, one of the last examples, it says, so one of the ways that they decided that after they got married and were done with college, they decided to live with Jeff's parents for a little while before they could come up with enough money to pay a mortgage, and eventually they wanted to make sure that they got a mortgage that they could charge rent for something that was 2-family or 3-family, I forget. And so that they could make some money to pay the mortgage, and they're not paying, and then anything extra is also going to the charity. So they're really thinking this through very hard and doing a very good job at it. And so Jeff's mom, Susie, is diagnosed with cancer. And at some point, somebody's asked her, or she's asking herself, well, isn't this time that you take some of that money and donate to cancer research? Now you got somebody who and and she had lived with this woman for 2 years now, kind of like her mom, right? They were a happy family altogether, and she realized, I'm sorry, I I can't, because I can help more people elsewhere. And going just through the painstaking thinking through all of this, um, you know, really having trouble with how to prioritize her time and her money towards helping others. And so I marked something else here just to finish up, especially since it's already 8 o'clock. So at the end, in the end of the article, the Guardian asks something about what the world would look like if everyone thought like Julia, like a do-gooder like good Julia. And he says, and they in the end they conclude, some do-gooders are happy, some are not so much, because they're going through a lot of pain. Not the pain that we would normally think is the issue, is that they're having to live with less money. That's the easy part. But the pain is in, how can I be doing more? How could I be doing more? And, and so whether it is saying absolutely not to that candy apple, or, giving up, one more bit, and I remember Schindler's List, right, where at the end of the movie, he's saying, well, I had that, he could have saved one more life with that, with the extra gold ring that he had, just this idea of, how much more can we do? And realizing that you could always do more. And they say here, some, do-gooders have forced themselves to know and keep knowing that everything they do affects other people, and that sometimes, though not always, their joy is purchased with other people's joy. Meaning, I'm happy because I'm seeing other people being made happy by what I'm doing. And remembering that, they open themselves to a sense of unlimited, crushing responsibility. Because I can only be happy, I can only have joy through the joy that I'm giving others. Yet, I could always give more joy. How can I do more? So many examples like this, inspirational to us. And I thought of bringing it up because, it's not easy. If it was easy, we would have closed the doors to this place a long time ago. Because these messages, have been told to us and have been left to us over 2,000 years ago and before. And yet we're still struggling and working with it. So hopefully the examples that I brought tonight, help us a little bit more in the direction of being more helpful, being more useful. And if we have to go through some additional trials ourselves, may it be in the utility of helping others. So I hope this was an inspiring message to you all, as it was to me. And I thank you all for your attention, and thank Jesus for his blessings and for this great evening. We are going to start the service of passes, which is an exchange of energy. And you're not obliged to go. It's optional. But we ask that in the meantime, we keep our minds thinking good thoughts and, waiting for the person who's coming to call you in. God bless us all.